Have you heard of or watched any of those videos where a white person would say they were curious about their ancestry, so they went on any of those ancestry platforms, submitted their DNA, and they found out that they are 1% African? They'd be like, I always knew I was because I love chicken so much, and they would be beaming. Or cases where the Northern Africans don't want to identify as Africans because they don't typically look like the rest of the Africans. Today's case is a little mix of that. It's a very old one. It happened in 1943 to 1948, and it's the Annang Killings in 1943 to 1948. So before I give you more about the case, first, disclaimer. This episode, This episode contains detailed accounts of real-life violence, secret societies, and colonial era punishments. Listener discretion is advised. Who are the Annangs, and why are we talking about them? Well, the Annang happen to be one of the many tribes in Nigeria. Let's start from the top so it's easier to understand. This is how growing up was for me in the 2000s. Basically, when you're born, in a year time, you're expected to be able to walk or crawl at least, but you should be able to walk at the age of 1. And by the time you're 2, you should be able to talk. A child is expected to be able to talk, say certain words, communicate, even if they're not very articulate from the age of 2, which is why at the age of 2, they're enrolled in school, mostly kindergarten. And by the time you're 4, you should be in nursery. 4 to 5 to 6, you should be done with your nursery, and then by the time you're 6 to 7, you should be starting your grade classes. And by the time you're 10 to 12, you should be starting secondary school, in other words, high school. By the time you're 16 to 18, you should be done with high school, and if you're interested, you can further to college or university or polytechnic, whatever suits you, or maybe not. When you're in kindergarten, that's where you learn lots of rhymes, lots of poems. They learn their alphabets. And one of the very first things we learn in school is actually the 36 states and capitals. And the list is alphabetical. And number 3 on the list is Akwa Ibom State, which is where today's case takes us. Akwa Ibom is in the South. Yeah, it's in the south of Nigeria. If you have listened to my previous episode, then you'll understand why I laughed when I said south. In Akwa Ibom, there's over 21 local governments. So the local governments have local leaders who report to the state government, who in turn report to the federal government. The 31 local governments are shared among 3 major tribes in Akwa Ibom, which are the Bibios, the Annangs, and the Oron. The Annangs are who we're focusing on today. 8 of the local governments out of the 31 local governments in Akwa Ibom are lands belonging to the Annangs. But when this case happened in 1943 to 1948, this land was just 2 major local governments, Abak and Ikolekwene. Now, today, they're split into 8 different local areas, but back then, it was just 2, Abak and Ikolekwene. Today, the Annangs are considered indigenous to Nigeria, to Akwa Ibom. But thousands of years ago, they were not Nigerians. The Annangs were Egyptians. Shocking, right? Yeah, according to history, they were originally Egyptians. This is something that has always really interested me. How in so many parts of the world, we have countries where they have a major language that helps communication, among the citizens. And then there are hundreds and hundreds of different languages. And chances are, a citizen that speaks language A might not even be able to understand language B. And then there's language C, there's language D, and E, and F, and they're all in the same country. But then they could have like English or French or any other language that helps the whole country understand each other. And that's also something back at home. As an Ibibio person, I cannot understand an Igbo person or a Yoruba person, but we're all in the same country. That has always interested me, and as a person who has had my fair share of Bible lessons, it always comes back to, the Tower of Babel, when God diversified languages to plant confusion. But it still is very surprising how the whole world went from one unified language to thousands of languages. And it's interesting to me to know that people who are indigenous to parts of the world now were not indigenous to that part thousands of years ago. So back to the Annangs. They were originally from Egypt and they were almost nomadic in nature. At first, their roots were in Egypt, but they started to migrate and they ended up finding themselves in places like Sierra Leone, Cameroon, Jamaica, even Ghana, and then settled in Nigeria thousands of years ago. Due to their migration, they ended up in Ghana in the Twi tribe, and in the Twi tribe, the word Annang means fourth son. So I don't know if they got their ethnic name, their tribe name, from the word fourth son in Ghana, or it's just the classic case of a word in my language would mean a completely different word in your language, and they sound the same but just different meanings. So they settled with the Twi tribe for a while, and then they moved to Cameroon, and they stayed in the mountainside of Cameroon, which was very close to the old Calabar. And this story is when they were settling in the old Calabar, because they were in Sierra Leone, and then they were in Ghana, and then they were in Cameroon, and then they crossed over the body of water connecting old Calabar to Cameroon, and they crossed over to Calabar, and they stayed there when this crime happened. And eventually in 1987, when Cross River was being divided and Akwa Ibom State was created from Cross River, the lands they were occupying now a part of Akwa Ibom State, which is why they are a part of Akwa Ibom State now. But there are still a couple of settlements of the Annang people in Cross River State presently, and also in Cameroon presently. But the largest of the settlement is in Akwa Ibom State. If you know anything about settlement or travels, you know that you pick things up wherever you go. Wherever you go, you keep picking little bits and little bits, even things you don't think you're picking up, you are picking them up. When people are so myopic, we tell them you need to travel a bit. The basis of what happened in the Annang tribe that's making them a topic of our true crime story today, they had picked up during their travels, because most of the things they did are things that are really, really known to other places, which are one of the places that they had settled in. So what did they really do? In the beginning of 1943, men and women start to show up dead, and people are wondering, oh my god, what's happening? They inspect closely and they were like, wild animals, because there were claw marks. They just looked mutilated, like animals had shredded them to bits. And people were panicking. They're like, we need to stay alert. We need to be careful. We need to stay safe. There's a wild animal that's out here feeding on people. And that narrative was easily accepted by the whole population, because just a few years back in another African country, there were two adult lions, male lions were eating up humans. And in just a few months, they had managed to eat about 28 to more humans. So when they saw people ending up dead and they looked like animals had eaten them, they were like, oh my god, it's happening here too. We have leopards that are eating humans, because there were a couple of sightings and they'd see an animal looking kind of shadow with leopard spots. So they were like, yes, it's definitely leopards eating people. And then they'd inspect the body, and the claw marks, everything was pointing to wild attack. But after a couple of killings and bodies showing up, they started to notice a pattern. The bodies were mutilated in the exact same manner. The bite marks, the cuts, everything was so deliberate and exact. No wild animal will bite or kill people in the exact manner all the time. So people started thinking, what if it's not animals actually? No animal can do this. This precision is very unlikely of wild animals. People got even more scared, because it's one thing to think, oh, wild animals are eating people. It's another thing to think, I think it's people that are doing this. Soon after, they started to find out that this people who were showing up dead were missing certain body parts, like their hands would be taken and their necks would be slashed, and they looked like actual knife cuts, not like So the colonial masters at the time, they were afraid. They didn't know what to do because they were not really interacting with the villagers every day. Rather, they would come to the villages, meet the heads of the villages and would tell them, we want you to work for us. So you rule your people as you've always done, but you're doing our decrees. Oh, and when this killing started to show up, the rumors were that it's the people from these ruling families that were killing the villagers, and they're doing it to this caliber. What would they do to us? It was a very messy situation. Farmers who were just walking home after spending all day at the farm, or children collecting firewood, or villagers heading to the river for water. It was just all those people who were harmless. And when this killing ramped up, the family heads would stay awake all night with weapons to protect their family, and every other person would sleep with a weapon next to them, just in case. Can you imagine sleeping with one eye open every day? By the time it was 1948, over 200 people were counted to be dead across 130 villages. At that time, the colonial government decided to respond with force. So they sent patrol officers to search the entire bushes, the forests, the river banks, everywhere. And they enforced curfews and investigations. And over 100 suspects were arrested. Most of them were linked to secret societies. Most of them were just innocent people. Trials were held in colonial courts, and 77 people out of the 100 who were arrested were convicted to be executed, while the rest were imprisoned. And out of the 77 people who were convicted to be executed, a large chunk of them were just innocent people who were all rounded up by the colonial masters because they couldn't tell who was guilty and who wasn't. They killed those people, and thankfully, among the people that were caught were a good number of the perpetrators who were doing these things. In early 1948, after the judgment was being passed and people were punished, the Leopard Killings came to an end. And today, nobody even knows about this case, but I don't think this is something we should forget, because most of those people who were killed, they were killed in a very horrible nature, and it looked like animals did it, but in fact were humans. So, curious little me, I thought, yes, it happened back then, but is there a photograph? So I went on Google and was like, the Annang Killings in 1943 to 1948, and I clicked images. So this painting, it looked almost like a drawing, and it showed what they actually looked like. They look like it's an actual animal, and I was like, creative. It's funny how evil people can be so creative. So then I started to wonder, are there any other African countries that are known to disguise themselves as animals to kill people? And there were results. I will not mention any country, but just saying those countries were some of the places that the Annangs had settled in. They picked up those things from those places. Yes, this case was not really much of a deep dive because it was in 1943 and not much records. This is all I could gather for you. Even when I knew it wasn't going to be much of a deep dive, I still wanted to talk about it because this one was very close to home for me. If there was any detail or any part of the case that was untrue or inaccurate, or any part that should be part of the case which I was not aware of, please do let me know in the comment below. I would like to know your thoughts. Please like and share this episode with friends and family or anyone who should be listening to this. Please follow, subscribe to Mysteries Niger. I feel like this case was a bit all over the place. I apologize, and I will do better in the next one. I will give you a really deep dive story in the next one. Thank you for listening. Tell me what case you want to hear next, and until next time, stay safe, be your brother's keeper. Bye.